Before dawn on October 18, 1944, the low fields near the German border lay silent. Cold mist clung to hedgerows and churned earth, settling on steel helmets and wool coats of the U.S. Army infantry crouched along a muddy farm track. Somewhere beyond the trees, artillery thumped with dull, distant rhythm, each concussion rolling through the ground like a warning pulse. In the half-light, an M4 Sherman idled nose forward, engine rumbling softly, tracks sunk deep into wet soil. The tank belonged to an American armored unit pushing east after the breakout from Normandy, part of the long grind toward the Rhine. Its crew had been awake for hours. Exhaust smoke curled from the rear deck, mixing with fog and the sour smell of gasoline. The turret loomed above the hedgerow, scarred with old impacts and streaked with dried mud from days of rain and movement. A .50 caliber machine gun sat locked forward, dark and still. Around the tank, riflemen adjusted their web gear and checked M1 Garand's, fingers numb inside damp gloves. No one spoke. Orders had already been given. The Sherman would move first, feeling out the road ahead, shielding the infantry from whatever waited beyond the next bend. The ground here was wrong for armored narrow lanes, soft earth, hidden ditches, but speed mattered. The line had to keep moving. Inside the tank, the air was thick with oil and metal. Gauges glowed faintly, needles steady. The engine's vibration traveled through the hull and into bone. Every man knew the routine: advance slow, watch the tree line, listen for the crack of anti-tank fire. Experience had burned those lessons in. German gunners favored ambush, letting the first vehicle pass before striking the second. Today, this Sherman was first. Maps taped inside the hull marked a thin road leading toward a village name barely legible from grime. Intelligence reports were outdated, enemy strength unknown. Mines were possible. So were concealed guns waiting at perfect range. The crew trusted the armor and the engine, but more than that, they trusted each other and the infantry depending on them to draw the first blow. They knew the opening minutes decided survival. Once contact was made, hesitation killed. Momentum saved lives. This advance would either break the quiet or become the last calm they remembered. As the sky lightened from black to gray, the infantry pressed closer to the hull, using it as cover. Boots squelched in mud. A distant burst of machine gun fire snapped, then faded. The tank's engine note rose slightly, ready to move. No alarms sounded. No shells fell. Yet every sense strained forward, waiting for the moment when silence would shatter and steel would be tested by fire. The order came without ceremony. The Sherman lurched forward, tracks biting into mud with a wet, grinding sound. The engine rose from a low rumble to a strained roar as the tank eased past the hedgerow and onto the narrow farm road. Infantry peeled away from the hull, spreading out along ditches and tree trunks, rifles up, eyes fixed ahead. The tank was alone now, exactly as planned. The road narrowed quickly. On both sides, dense hedges and skeletal trees closed in, their branches clawing at the turret as the Sherman pushed through. Mud splashed up against the hull, streaking over faded olive drab paint and white tactical markings. The smell of damp earth mixed with hot oil. Every rotation of the tracks sounded too loud, too exposed, echoing through the quiet countryside. Inside the tank, the crew felt the terrain before they saw it. The suspension groaned over hidden ruts. The hull rocked left, then right. Vision slits framed a tunnel of gray and green, broken only by fence posts and the dark mouths of drainage culverts. This was perfect ground for an ambush. Too tight to maneuver. Too soft to reverse fast. Too silent. A burst of distant small arms fire crackled off to the left, quickly swallowed by fog. No rounds struck the tank. No explosions followed. The absence was worse than contact. German anti-tank crews were trained to wait, to let armor move fully into the kill zone before firing. The Sherman kept rolling, slow and deliberate, commander scanning through binoculars, gun trained forward, loader standing ready beside stacked 75mm rounds. The road bent slightly downhill toward a shallow crossroads marked on the map but invisible through the mist. Fields opened briefly on the right, churned by earlier fighting, littered with broken fencing and the dark shapes of abandoned equipment. On the left, a low rise masked whatever lay beyond. The tank crossed a faint set of tank tracks pressed into the mud, fresh, heading the opposite direction. The engine labored as the Sherman climbed out of the dip. Exhaust poured from the rear grille in thick, gray plumes. Inside, the temperature climbed, sweat forming beneath helmets despite the cold outside. Hands tightened on levers and grips. The radio hissed with static, then went silent again. No warnings. No updates. Just the sound of steel moving forward into uncertainty. As the tank crested the rise, the hedgerows fell away. Ahead lay open ground funneling into the crossroads, bordered by a stone wall and a line of shattered trees. The crew could see farther now, and that clarity brought dread. A burned-out half-track lay off the road, blackened and torn apart, its metal twisted inward. This was not empty ground. It was chosen ground. The Sherman slowed, nose dipping slightly as the driver eased off the throttle. The gun steadied. The air felt heavy, expectant. Somewhere ahead, unseen eyes tracked the tank's movement, waiting for the exact second when armor, engine, and crew would be perfectly exposed and the first shot would come screaming in. The shot came without warning. A violent crack split the air, sharper than artillery, louder than anything the crew had heard that morning. The impact slammed into the Sherman's left front quarter with bone-jarring force, steel shrieking as the round struck home. The tank lurched hard, suspension collapsing for a split second as the driver fought the controls. Dust and rust flakes rained from the interior walls. The first German anti-tank round had found its mark. Outside, the hit echoed across the crossroads, rolling back through the trees. Inside, the sound was deafening, metal tearing, armor flexing, the unmistakable scream of steel under stress. The crew felt it before they understood it. The hull shuddered. The engine coughed once, then surged, protesting under sudden strain. A second later, heat bloomed. Flames burst from the engine compartment, licking upward through damaged grills. Thick black smoke poured into the fighting compartment, acrid and choking, instantly burning the throat and eyes. The smell of gasoline and oil filled the tank, overwhelming everything else. Visibility dropped to nothing but swirling gray and orange. The Sherman kept moving. The driver forced the throttle forward, boots slipping on the pedals as the engine screamed in defiance. The tank ground ahead, tracks chewing into mud, momentum barely holding. The commander snapped his head toward the periscope, trying to spot the gun that had fired, but smoke blurred the view. Somewhere ahead, an enemy crew was already reloading. Inside, the temperature spiked. Metal surfaces grew hot to the touch. Sweat turned to stinging streams down faces smeared with grime. The loader braced himself against the recoil guard as the turret rocked, waiting for the order that hadn't yet come. Ammunition sat inches away, stacked and vulnerable, each shell now a silent threat. Outside, American infantry flattened into ditches as the tank absorbed the blow meant for them. Dirt and debris rained down as the Sherman crawled forward, burning and loud, drawing every hostile eye on the field. The crossroads had become a trap, and the tank was the centerpiece. A second round tore past the turret, smashing into the ground beyond with a thunderous detonation. Shrapnel rattled off the hull like thrown gravel. The gunner swung the barrel toward the flash, but smoke and flame swallowed the sight picture. The radio crackled once, then went dead, drowned by the roar of fire. The engine began to falter. RPMs dipped. The smell grew worse. Every man inside knew the rule. A burning tank was a dead tank. Training said bail out. Survival said escape. But outside those steel walls, American riflemen were pinned, and the only thing standing between them and machine gun fire was this crippled Sherman still rolling forward. The tank pushed on, flames climbing higher, smoke thickening by the second. Somewhere ahead, another gun waited, already aligned, already steady, ready to finish what the first shot had started. Inside the Sherman, time collapsed into heat and noise. Smoke rolled thick and heavy, pressing down from the ceiling like a living thing. It clawed at lungs, burned eyes raw, and erased distance until every surface felt inches away. The air tasted of gasoline, oil, and scorched metal. Breathing became work. Thinking became harder. Flames chewed at the rear compartment, feeding on spilled fuel and ruptured lines. The engine roared unevenly, coughing through damage, each surge followed by a warning shudder that rippled through the hull. Metal pinged and popped as plates expanded under heat. The tank was alive now, but only in the way a wounded animal thrashes before collapse. The crew stayed at their stations. Hands blistered as they gripped overheated steel. Sleeves smoked. Sweat poured freely, soaking wool uniforms and darkening fabric to near black. Helmets knocked against vision blocks as the tank lurched forward, blind and burning. The commander fought to keep his head clear, wiping at his eyes with a gloved hand already slick with grime and fuel. Visibility was gone. Sound was distorted, muffled by fire and the pounding engine. Training screamed one word, out. A burning Sherman was a death sentence. Everyone knew it. Ammunition racks lined the interior, each shell a potential bomb. If the fire reached them, there would be no warning and no survivors. Seconds mattered. Escape hatches were close, tempting, outlined by faint light filtering through smoke. Outside, the tank drew fire like a magnet. Rounds snapped overhead. Machine gun bursts tore through hedgerows, cutting at the infantry pinned behind the Sherman's path. The tank's presence mattered more than its condition. As long as it moved, it absorbed the enemy's attention. As long as it rolled, men behind it lived. The driver forced the Sherman forward, foot heavy on the throttle. The engine screamed in protest, RPMs spiking, then dropping, then climbing again. The smell worsened. Flames crept closer to the fighting compartment, licking through seams and gaps. Smoke thickened until shapes blurred into shadows. The loader braced himself, counting breaths, steadying against the turret ring. Each jolt sent sparks raining from damaged wiring overhead. The gunner wiped soot from his face and leaned into the sight, fighting smoke and vibration to keep the barrel trained forward. He could not see a target. He aimed anyway, holding the ground ahead by presence alone. The commander made the calculation no one wanted to make. If they bailed out now, the infantry would be exposed. The crossroads would be lost. If they stayed, the tank might explode beneath them. Either way, the risk was final. He chose movement. The Sherman crawled on, flames trailing behind like a signal flare. Heat turned the interior into an oven. Breaths came shallow and fast. Muscles burned. Time stretched and snapped with every second the tank refused to die. Then the engine faltered hard. The roar dropped to a ragged growl. Power dipped. The Sherman slowed, tracks grinding deeper into mud as momentum bled away. Inside the smoke-filled hull, every man felt it at the same instant. Fire crackled louder. The machine that had carried them forward was beginning to fail. Ahead, unseen through smoke and flame, another anti-tank gun waited for the Sherman to stop moving. The choice was no longer theoretical. Inside the burning Sherman, every rule of armored warfare pointed toward escape. The fire was spreading. The engine was failing. Ammunition cooked inches away. Survival doctrine was clear. Bail out early or die inside steel. Yet no one moved for the hatches. The reason lay outside the hull. Through smoke-choked periscopes and shattered vision blocks, the commander glimpsed American infantry pressed flat against the earth. Men from a rifle platoon hugged shallow ditches and shell craters, helmets low, rifles clutched tight. They were trapped by machine gun fire raking the hedgerow and the open ground beyond. The Sherman was their shield. Its bulk drew fire. Its presence pinned enemy gunners who would otherwise turn their weapons on exposed flesh. If the tank stopped, the crossroads would collapse. The crew understood this without discussion. Tankers and infantry trained together for moments like this, though none imagined it unfolding inside a burning vehicle. The driver felt the tank's slowing weight and forced more power from the engine, teeth clenched, breath shallow. The gunner kept the barrel trained forward, not to fire, but to threaten. The loader steadied himself beside the ammunition racks, knowing each shell might detonate if flames reached them. Bailing out meant abandoning the men behind them. The commander thought of the briefing before dawn, the simple instruction to move first and draw contact. That mission had been fulfilled too well. The Sherman had found the enemy's chosen ground, absorbed the first blow, and revealed the ambush. Now the cost of leaving would be paid by others. The calculus was brutal and immediate. Stay and burn, or leave and watch the line break. Outside, bullets snapped and cracked against steel. Machine gun rounds sparked and ricocheted off the hull, marking the tank as the center of the fight. German gunners focused on the Sherman, pouring fire into it, certain the kill was near. That attention spared the infantry precious seconds. Seconds to crawl. Seconds to breathe. Seconds to survive. Inside, the heat climbed higher. Smoke blurred faces into shapes. Eyes stung and watered. Every breath scraped the throat raw. Muscles shook from strain and exhaustion. Still, no one reached for a hatch. The tank crawled forward by will alone, its crew bound together by an unspoken understanding that this moment would define them more than any medal or citation. The commander raised the intercom and issued the order to keep moving. Not for glory. Not for doctrine. For the men pinned in the mud behind them. The Sherman shuddered, tracks grinding, engine screaming against damage. Flames trailed from the rear like a signal visible across the field. The tank was no longer just a machine. It was a barrier, a promise, and a final line. And somewhere ahead, another gun crew watched the burning Sherman advance and prepared to deliver the shot that would test whether that line could still hold. The Sherman no longer advanced with confidence. It clawed forward in short, brutal surges, every yard stolen from the earth by force and refusal. Flames rolled from the engine deck in steady sheets, fed by ruptured lines and leaking fuel. Smoke poured into the fighting compartment, so thick it reduced the world to heat, vibration, and instinct. The driver fought the machine with both hands and both feet. The throttle stayed pinned as RPMs surged and sagged, the engine coughing like a wounded animal. Each gear change came late, grinding and violent, the transmission screaming in protest. The tank shuddered, slowed, then lurched again, tracks chewing mud into black slurry behind it. Inside, the crew worked by memory. Vision was useless. The gunner wiped his face with a burned sleeve and leaned into the sight, aligning the barrel by feel more than sightline. The loader counted shells with his fingertips, touching each casing, making sure none had shifted loose in the chaos. Every jolt threatened to turn ammunition into shrapnel. Outside, enemy fire intensified. Machine guns hammered the hull from the tree line, rounds snapping and ricocheting in sharp metallic cracks. Anti-tank rifles fired from concealment, their shots smacking armor with dull, hateful thuds. German gunners adjusted, walking fire toward the engine compartment, sensing weakness. Smoke made the Sherman visible from miles away. It was a moving target wrapped in flame. American infantry stayed glued to the ground behind it. When the tank moved, they moved. When it slowed, they froze. The Sherman dictated the rhythm of survival. Its forward crawl dragged the line with it, yard by yard, breath by breath. The tank's suffering bought them space. Inside, the heat became unbearable. Metal surfaces seared exposed skin. Gloves smoked. Breathing turned shallow and frantic as oxygen thinned. The commander coughed violently, forcing air through burning lungs, eyes streaming as he tracked movement through distorted glass. He knew the fire was winning. He also knew stopping meant death for others. The Sherman hit another rut and nearly stalled. Tracks spun uselessly, throwing mud high into the air. The engine dropped to a choking idle, flames surging as airflow changed. For a moment, it felt over. Then the driver forced the gear home, engine screaming as traction returned. The tank lurched free, momentum restored for a few more seconds. A high-velocity round screamed past the turret, so close it rocked the tank with its passage. Dirt and stone exploded ahead. The gunner swung the barrel toward the muzzle flash and fired. The recoil slammed through the hull, the blast momentarily clearing smoke as the shell tore into the hedgerow. Splinters and debris erupted. Whether it hit flesh or wood did not matter. It forced heads down. It bought time. The radio remained dead. The crew was alone inside a failing machine, cut off from command, operating on instinct and loyalty. Every sense narrowed to one task: keep moving. Fire crackled louder. Smoke thickened. The engine note wavered again, this time lower, weaker. Ahead, the ground sloped gently upward toward another line of trees. Beyond that rise lay open space or another killing zone. The Sherman crawled toward it, burning and loud, daring the enemy to finish the job. The crew braced for the next impact, knowing the tank could not take another hit like the first and that stopping now would end everything. The Sherman reached the base of the rise and slowed to a crawl. Flames still poured from the rear, smoke boiling upward in thick columns that marked its position like a beacon. The crew felt the infantry close in behind them, sensed their movement through vibration and sound rather than sight. Boots splashed in mud. Rifles scraped against stone. Men pressed forward because the tank still lived. The commander steadied himself and focused on the ground ahead. This was the point where armor either broke through or died in place. The Sherman could not retreat. It could barely advance. So it did the only thing left. It held. The gunner fired again, not at a confirmed target but at suspected positions along the tree line. Each shot tore through branches and earth, sending splinters and soil into the air. The blasts forced enemy gunners to duck and reposition. That hesitation mattered. In the pauses between explosions, American infantry surged forward, dragging wounded, crossing open ground that seconds earlier had been lethal. Machine gun fire intensified in response. Rounds ripped into the hull from multiple angles, hammering steel in a relentless rhythm. Sparks cascaded inside the tank with every impact. The loader flinched but kept working, feeding shells, counting remaining rounds by touch. Ammunition was running low. Time was running lower. The Sherman stopped just short of the crest. The engine sputtered and nearly died. Smoke thickened again, filling the compartment until breathing felt impossible. Still, the crew refused to abandon their posts. The tank's bolt blocked enemy sightlines, its burning frame anchoring the American advance. Behind it, the infantry spread out, taking ground that would have been unreachable minutes earlier. A German anti-tank weapon fired from the left. The round struck the earth beside the hull, blasting mud and stone across the tank's flank. The concussion rocked the Sherman, knocking the gun slightly off alignment. The driver corrected instinctively, keeping the hull square to the threat. The commander ordered fire. The gunner responded without hesitation, the recoil slamming through the tank as another shell roared out. Silence followed for a heartbeat. Then scattered rifle fire replaced the heavier guns. Enemy resistance wavered, disrupted by shock and the relentless presence of the burning Sherman that refused to die. The crossroads behind them was no longer a death trap. It was a foothold. The infantry reached the tank's rear, using its flaming bulk as cover. Men crouched low, some tapping the hull as they passed, a silent acknowledgement of what the crew was doing for them. The Sherman had become a wall, a shield built of steel, smoke, and stubbornness. Inside, the heat peaked. The engine screamed one last time and faltered again. The crew knew they were at the edge. The tank could not hold much longer. But it had held long enough. The infantry was moving. The line was bending forward. Ahead, the rise crested into open ground. Beyond it, enemy fire slackened, replaced by hurried movement and withdrawal. The Sherman inched forward, burning and scarred, having done what it was meant to do. Then the engine gave a sharp, final cough and the tank shuddered, threatening to stop forever. The Sherman finally lost the argument with gravity and fire. At the crest of the rise, the engine gave out with a choking grind, metal screaming as gears stripped and pistons seized. The tank rolled another half-length on momentum alone, then stopped. Tracks locked. The burning machine went still. Inside, the silence was crushing. The engine's roar vanished, replaced by crackling fire and the dull thud of distant rifle shots. Smoke thickened instantly without airflow, pooling low and heavy. The heat surged. Breathing became desperate, shallow gasps scraped through burning throats. The tank was no longer advancing. It was no longer even alive. It was a steel coffin waiting to seal. The crew did not panic. The commander scanned through the periscope one last time. Beyond the crest, American infantry were spreading out, taking cover along the reverse slope, rifles up, moving with purpose. The line had shifted. The tank had carried them this far. That knowledge mattered now more than orders or doctrine. The gunner stayed on the sight, finger steady on the trigger, barrel trained toward the tree line where enemy movement flickered and vanished. Even immobile, the Sherman was still a threat. German gunners hesitated, unsure if the tank was truly dead or simply waiting. That hesitation bought more seconds. Inside, the loader braced against the ammunition racks as flames crept closer. He checked the remaining rounds by touch, knowing it was likely meaningless. If the fire reached them, there would be no second chance. The driver kept his foot on the dead throttle out of habit, muscles locked, jaw clenched. The machine was gone. The will was not. The commander made the call to hold position. Not to retreat. Not to abandon. Hold. As long as the tank stayed occupied, enemy fire stayed focused on it and not on the men now consolidating ground behind the rise. The Sherman had become an immovable barrier, burning and loud, anchoring the battlefield by sheer defiance. Outside, bullets continued to strike the hull, fewer now, scattered. Enemy fire had shifted, uncertain. Smoke from the tank drifted across the field, obscuring sightlines and masking American movement. The infantry used it instinctively, advancing through the haze, dragging wounded, establishing firing positions. Inside, the heat reached its limit. Surfaces glowed faintly. Gloves burned through. Every breath felt thinner than the last. The commander knew they were out of time. The tank could no longer protect them if it exploded. Staying meant death. Leaving meant leaving the machine that had carried the fight. He reached for the hatch handle, hesitated, then stopped. One more moment. One more delay. If the enemy fired again now, it would be into an empty slope, not a retreating line. The Sherman burned in place, silent except for fire. Its crew waited inside, counting seconds, daring fate to make the next move. And somewhere in the smoke ahead, an unseen gun crew lined up a final shot on the motionless tank. The second hit came from close range. A sharp flash tore through the smoke, followed by an impact that slammed into the Sherman's forward hull. Steel rang like a struck bell. Shrapnel sprayed outward, ripping through the air and into the dirt around the tank. The blast rocked the chassis hard enough to throw the crew against their restraints. Inside, the fire surged. Flames raced along the damaged bulkhead, driven by the shock, fed by fuel and oil that had nowhere left to go. Smoke turned from gray to black, thick and suffocating. The fighting compartment vanished into darkness and heat. The tank shuddered, then held, its armor cracked but not breached. Outside, the explosion drew every eye. Enemy gunners poured fire into the stationary Sherman, convinced the kill was finally theirs. Machine gun bursts stitched the ground around it. Rifle fire snapped through smoke. The tank absorbed it all, burning brighter, louder, impossible to ignore. Behind the crest, American infantry seized the moment. With enemy weapons focused on the tank, riflemen surged forward in small groups, bounding from cover to cover. They crossed ground that had been deadly minutes earlier, boots pounding mud, bodies low, rifles ready. The Sherman's suffering bought them their last chance to break through. Inside the tank, the crew felt the end approaching. The heat was unbearable now. Skin burned through fabric. Each breath scraped like broken glass. The loader coughed violently, barely able to stay upright. The gunner wiped his face and fired one final round through smoke and flame, the recoil shaking the tank as the shell tore into the tree line ahead. The commander made the final call. Hatches were opened. Fresh air rushed in like a wave, bringing cold and sound and the sharp crack of gunfire. Smoke billowed outward as the crew began to climb free, one by one, moving fast despite exhaustion and burns. Outside, infantry shouted and fired, laying down covering fire as the tankers spilled out onto the reverse slope. The Sherman burned unchecked now, flames roaring skyward, ammunition beginning to cook off with sharp, metallic bangs. Shards of steel popped loose, clanging against the hull. The tank that had carried the line forward was dying loudly, violently, without surrender. The crew hit the ground hard and rolled away, dragged into shallow cover by infantry hands. Dirt filled mouths and eyes. Hearts hammered. Behind them, the Sherman erupted again, a column of fire and smoke marking the exact place where the advance had turned. Enemy fire slackened. Confusion spread. The American line surged past the crest, rifles barking, grenades exploding among the trees. The breakthrough was happening. Not because the tank survived, but because it did not stop fighting until the very last second. As the crew looked back through smoke and flame, the burning Sherman collapsed inward, its silhouette sagging against the sky. And in that moment, no one knew whether the enemy still had one final shot left to fire. The Sherman burned long after the fighting moved on. Flames chewed through its hull until the steel sagged and split, smoke rising in a thick column that drifted across the field like a scar. Ammunition cooked off one shell at a time, sharp metallic cracks echoing after the gunfire faded. By the time the noise died, the tank was nothing but a blackened wreck, tracks twisted, turret locked forever toward the line it had held. But the mission had already moved past it. American infantry poured over the crest in force, spreading out across the reverse slope with practiced speed. Rifles cracked. Grenades thumped into tree lanes and shallow trenches. Enemy resistance collapsed in pockets, then broke entirely. The killing ground that had claimed so many moments earlier was now controlled ground, marked by boot prints, spent casings, and bodies lying still in the mud. The tank crew lay low behind cover, coughing smoke from their lungs, uniforms burned and torn. Hands shook as adrenaline drained away. Faces were blackened with soot, eyes red and raw. They were alive. That fact felt unreal. Around them, infantrymen moved with purpose, slapping shoulders, passing ammunition, pulling wounded clear. The line was intact. The advance continued. No one spoke of the tank yet. There was no time. Orders carried forward. The unit pressed on toward the next objective, deeper into contested ground, following the momentum bought with steel and fire. The crew watched them go, knowing their role in the fight was over, but their impact was already written into the ground itself. Medics arrived, working quickly, checking burns and shrapnel wounds. The smell of antiseptic mixed with smoke and churned earth. The commander looked back once more at the wrecked Sherman silhouetted against the gray sky. It had done exactly what it was asked to do. Nothing more. Nothing less. It had moved first, taken the hits, and refused to stop until stopping no longer mattered. Later, the battlefield would be mapped and logged. Reports would list a disabled tank and a successful infantry advance. Coordinates would replace memory. But for the men who were there, the truth was simpler. A machine burned so others could move. Men stayed inside fire so others could live. As the smoke thinned and the sounds of combat shifted farther away, the wreck settled into silence. It would remain there until engineers dragged it aside or stripped it for parts. Eventually, grass would grow around it. The war would move on. But in that moment, with the advance secured and the enemy pushed back, the crew understood something that did not require words. The tank had stopped. The mission had not. The line held. The infantry lived. And somewhere ahead, the war waited with more fire, more steel, and more moments where someone would have to decide when to stop and when not to.